I know we don't have very many people today, but I'll go ahead and just run through the release checklist one more time. We're getting awfully close. This should look familiar to most people at this point. The remaining things we have left between us and the V1 Alpha 1 release seem to be just a little bit left on conditions. We specifically gateway class. Don't think James is here, but I can follow up with him. We also want to have some kind of automation around verifying that our examples are still up to date. And the vast majority of work left is around documentation. API cleanup, there is a PR that I think is just about ready to go in. And with that, maybe we should get into, Bowie, you mentioned release candidate yesterday, and we talked about it some. I don't know if there's anything else we need to cover today. I think our goal had been to release this, to come up with a release candidate ideally on Friday of this week, like tomorrow. Does that match what you remember, Bowie? I'm not sure. If you are trying to say something, I can't hear you. With that said, I'll move on then. For PR and issue triage, there's a few PRs that are still open. They're all fairly straightforward and tiny, except for this API validation and cleanup one, which, as the comment suggests, was absolutely massive. Thank you to everyone for the feedback on this one. Yeah, so this is really, really simple. It just needs, I think, a final LGTM here. Should be pretty straightforward to move forward on this one. And every additional PR after this is going to be based on this work. So that is API validation and cleanup. I think we're mostly good to go on this front. Actually, Damian, since you're here, I'm curious. I was a little confused on this final feedback from you. It was something about our status, and my interpretation is that maybe it should not have been optional. Do you happen to remember what you were suggesting here?
Yeah, Rob. I think the feedback was generally that when I looked through the PR, I see that I think it's the gateway status conditions have like certain defaults set and so forth, and then when you go to like listener status conditions, those look different, and you go through some of the other status conditions throughout the types, and they differ from the gateway status conditions. And so it's just, I think we briefly discussed this yesterday, of having, unless there's a reason for the status conditions at the listener level, it's HTTP route level, I would think that it should be common.
So just to clarify, what you're suggesting is that they should have a shared default value?
No, just some of the tags where it's like a list map type. Some of those kube builder tags that are being used.
Okay, see, when I looked at this, I noticed that if this went to the thing I thought it did, it just had the optional tag, and I thought that's all you were referring to. That was the only difference I'd found here. But I think now that I'm understanding what you're saying, it's the list map key and patch, merge, those kinds of things.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
correct?
all the kind of the kube builder tags.
Okay. Do you mind if we cover that in a follow-up PR? Yeah, I hate keeping on rebasing off of this this individual PR because it makes so many changes
Yeah,
every
no, that,
rebase.
yeah, let's get
Okay.
this thing in here because it is big and I'm sure very difficult for you to deal with. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Appreciate it.
Mhm.
All right, thanks.
Rob, can we merge this like now?
Yeah. So I don't have that control because I'm the one who made the PR. But if
Okay.
anyone wants to add an LGTM,
Is everyone okay who has comments? And is there any hanging comments of people who aren't here? Because I would like to just merge this and then we can iterate on it.
Yeah,
I think
let's
do need.
I was gonna say let's merge it unless Rob, is there something major? Otherwise, some of the
No.
final feedbacks, and I figure after it merges too, I want to just kind of take one look through everything because I'm sure it seems like every time I look at this, there's always something else I catch that I
Yeah.
didn't see from the time before, and because
Yeah,
it's so big,
absolutely.
it's tough to catch. Yeah.
This was by no means meant to be a complete PR. Just hopefully get us maybe 90% of the way there.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll get there.
So yeah, unless Rob, you have any
No.
concerns or questions, Bowie, do you want to tag it?
Yeah, I'm going to tag it unless someone yells
Perfect.
like right now.
I'm glad to see this go in. Thank you. All right, so I've got a couple more PRs that I based off of this, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but this was updating route namespaces to use the route gateways pattern. This is going to be familiar. I want to cover two things that we didn't cover yesterday very well. I got some feedback. Oh, I forget this is based off of that other one. 1 second. Okay. I got some feedback from Danian yesterday that was excellent. That it would make sense to go ahead and just add that all namespaces option like we'd talked about. This, of course, could be communicated with Selector, empty Selector, but explicitly saying all namespaces feels a little easier to understand. This is a little duplicative in a sense, but I think it makes for an easier to understand and work with API. So I have gone ahead and added that. A second question that I had and gotten some feedback on was whether or not we should have a default here. Right now, there's a default of from same namespace. And I'm curious if we should just not. So what this looks like is anytime you create a gateway, even if you don't set this field, it's going to get set for you, and it's going to have from same namespace. The argument for that is it's very clear that routes you're selecting are restricted to the same namespace, and it's not ambiguous. The argument against that is just it pollutes the YAML with something that could potentially be inferred as a default. I don't know. I don't know. Does anyone have a strong preference one way or the other here?
Basically, if I understand it correctly, if you don't set the default, then the user has to set it, right?
No, so the idea would be to make it optional and not set a default, and if it's not set, infer the default.
Yeah, I'm not super keen on that because ideally the user should have some expectation. And this is kind of important. Like they should know whether they want same namespace or not. And if we're saying that there's an abstraction that the infrastructure provider is giving for the controller, like they shouldn't care about the controller so much as say like this class is meant for this purpose, then having it this sort of thing based on the controller seems to be less useful. if anything, if we're not going to have a default, we should just make the user explicitly say what they want.
That's where I lean towards, because I think on small, as I mentioned in my comments, I'd see that there's strong use cases for both allowing only namespace or same namespace along with all namespaces. I think especially for small environments where it's gonna be more common to have a single gateway that supports all routes across different namespaces.
Okay,
I mean, it might not be bad just to say, hey, let's not set the default, make it required, provide these different enum options, and then maybe as we iterate on this, if we start to see more users prefer a certain default, we could always add that as a default later on, make it required, and have the user.
We'd have to do it before beta, otherwise it's going to be a version transition. But yes, I agree that this is something that, like, I can see things like how regex is interpreted or something to be sort of controller specific, but this is almost like a very generic non-controller specific field, but we're saying you should default it from the controller, which feels like there's a bit of a mismatch.
No, to clarify, what I was saying is we would specify what not, like, every controller would implement the lack of namespaces being specified here as the same thing from same namespace. You just wouldn't actually have to say it. So the argument, so let me just say,
I see. Isn't that confusing?
Yes, I think it is. I think the argument for it is, by specifying route namespaces, you would be saying, I want more namespaces. And if you don't specify it, you're fine with just the same namespace you're already in. That would be the argument in favor of that. I think I agree with what everyone has already said, that we should just require someone to set this so there's no confusion at all. And
I see. How does that work? Because, like, for example, when you submit a pod spec, it's usually pretty sparse. And then when it gets pulled through the whole system, it comes back with like a whole bunch of stuff set to it.
Yeah.
In what you're suggesting is that you don't set anything. It gets pulled through the system. When it comes back, it's actually still empty.
Yeah.
Which might be confusing, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm fine with requiring this. I think that's a reasonable solution here. And it also, removing the default also uses an argument that I used elsewhere in another PR that we'll cover today, which is not, like, removing a default is something that is hard to do in a backwards compatible way. Adding a default can be done in a backwards compatible way because you're not breaking any current users. So anyways, starting without defaults in a sense is actually probably preferred, and then we might get a better understanding of what a default should be based on usage. So I will plan on removing this.
So you would you would make it a required field that the operator must specify.
Yeah.
Okay.
And on that note, does anyone mind this addition of the all namespaces option? With the understanding that you could already accomplish this without that option, just potentially more confusing.
Shouldn't we say that, I think the API reviewers will flag this as a duplication. We probably just want to add in the comment just to flag it up for them so that we can, like I said, select all namespaces. This can also be done by setting a nil selector.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So I can do that with this. This is an equivalent. This is equivalent to selector with an empty selector.
That just, I think mainly this is just a defect of the selector.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's nice just to be explicit in the docs. Yeah. So yeah, I like that idea, Billy.
Okay. Great. All right, well, I'll get those updates in shortly. There's a related issue here, and we have several issues to cover, but since this is so related to what we just discussed, I wanted to bring it up here if I can get the right issue. Okay. So what we have right now is a bit of a strange API here. We have, speaking of duplication, this feels like duplication. We have routes, and then inside routes, we have route namespaces and route selector. It seems like the route prefix on route namespaces and route selector may not actually be necessary. I explored that a little bit, and this is the case where that feels a little weird, where you have selector right above selector and the indentation here matters. But as a whole, routes.namespaces feels reasonably clear to me than routes.route namespaces or routes.route selector. I don't know. And certainly if you don't specify namespaces at all, or if you don't specify a selector here, this becomes remarkably cleaner than if you had route selector here, in my opinion.
Like we could put namespace selector if you wanted to, if you think that the namespaces is going to be the lesser use case for disambiguation.
Would that be namespace selector, like this specific field, so namespaces dot namespace selector?
Yeah, just, you know, for like to get rid of this like fat finger accidents.
Yeah.
Because I think if YAML, if you have the same field and you accidentally unindented it, then it just takes the latest, the last one or something.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, yeah, I can see how you accidentally pull this back, and then, I mean, it would be invalid in this case because selector would be unspecified. Or, yeah, no, I mean, you're right. This would be weird. Especially if selector was already set.
It would select everything accidentally?
I think by default, we're calling it nil and not empty for selector. And so it would be some kind of validation error, or as in the controller would have to.
It would, when nil is select none, or is it select everything? I cannot remember.
Nil is select none.
Oh, okay. Oh, at least that doesn't work.
Yeah, it is the annoying thing about the selector API. Nil means none, empty means everything, and the difference between them is, yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Does this general removal of the prefix seem reasonable? I'll take silence as support of this. If anyone has an issue with this, definitely let me know. I can file a PR to actually implement this. I don't think it's critical. As I was working with this, it felt like we had some repetitive names here. Okay. The other PR that I think there's several PRs that, oh, I haven't gotten to this one yet. I'll make sure I get there next. This one I know is going to be controversial, or I feel like it could be controversial. One, this is the first part of this I don't think is controversial, and this is based on the discussion in 293, where it seems like we got some reasonable consensus that we should move from resource back to kind. Even though resource would be easier for implementations, it would be more confusing for users, seem to be the general consensus. So that is the first part of this PR. The second part of this PR is potentially much more controversial, and that is removing all object references we have that had defaults in them. So if you remember, we still had a few object references left, like we'll get here eventually, a default object reference that defaulted to core and services for group and resource previously. And we also had a one that defaulted to secrets for group and resource. And the feedback that I got in here was this was not intuitive if you just, so what this would allow you to do is allow you to write a YAML manifest that had some reference, a certificate reference, and then just a name. And it would not be obvious to anyone looking at that manifest what that certificate reference was referring to. Admittedly, these defaults would get filled in, and if you did, a get from API, you'd see that, but just looking at the manifest, it may not be obvious. And similar argument for the service default reference. And instead of that, the preference was what we've done with, where was it? Backend policy. I think we've already done this, where you can specify either a service name or an object reference. So it's clear I'm targeting a service name or I'm doing a full object reference. That seems like a slightly easier to understand pattern here. But this is just my take on this. With that said, going back to what we've been talking about earlier, I use the same argument here of it's a lot easier to add defaults in the future than to remove defaults. So I would rather lean on the side of less defaults initially. And if we see that there really is demand for defaults, maybe we add that with, say, a secret name kind of field or a service name kind of field instead of these default groups and resources or kinds. That is my motivation here and my rationale. With that said, I am very interested in feedback and thoughts on this because I know it may not be something like everyone agrees with.
I don't think it's a major issue to change this. I think making it explicit is fine and we'll get some feedback. Just one comment on the PR itself is that I think in the examples, you should just make sure to use real kinds. So in a couple of examples, you've used parameters, and I think there's another one which is a custom backend. So we should use kinds which are in the cluster so that you can apply this YAML to verify it.
So that's good feedback. The problem with at least parameters is for parameters references, there is no in-cluster resource that, by definition, that's meant to reference a custom resource. So we can't, we can't do anything with that. I don't think. There's no cluster scoped configuration resource that we could reference.
Oh, actually, sorry, I'm losing my mind. It will still apply because it's just a string.
Yeah.
API server isn't validating that it's a type. Sorry. I'm just losing it. That's okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Forget everything I said.
No, that's fine. I mean, it is unfortunate because there is basically no validation around this. I mean, there's the basic things of min length, max length, but that's about all we've got here. And I have been verifying manually that this and the previous PRs all actually, the examples are actually applying with the CRDs, and it is all actually working, at least on my cluster. Same as the old works on my machine kind of thing, but theoretically, these should all work. Okay. Anyone else have any hesitation around this this change? Cool. This diff does look large, but as soon as this one gets in, I'll do another rebase, and this actual commit is relatively small, mostly just removing things. Yeah, okay. Then with that, I think there's a couple other PRs here. Damian, thank you for working on docs. I don't think this is a relatively small one, right?
Yeah, real small. I haven't had a chance to see the feedback yet.
Okay.
But yeah,
Looked great to me.
Yeah, generally what I try to do is get away from some of the specifics that were originally in the workflow doc, just to avoid it becoming stale again, and just being more of a higher level request workflow, maybe easier for someone new to understand.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for adding this in. I'll take a closer look at this after as well. Cool. Are there any other, James, is this ready for another round of review? I haven't paid attention to this one.
Yep, that one's good. So what I ended up doing, if you use the mod equals read only flag, then go just works, and it doesn't it doesn't require you to populate the modules or anything. So
good call.
yeah, it's great.
Okay. Yeah, we should be using that everywhere. Okay. Cool. And so this works with Go modules. It also works outside of Go path.
For me, it does. Yes.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. That's great. Okay, thanks for taking this on. Yeah, I have not looked at this as closely as I should have. Cool. I will follow up. And then the other ones, oh yeah, I don't think we've brought this up anywhere yet. Extensions on Gateway. There was a bit of discussion in the PR itself about this, about whether we should add an extension ref to Gateway. Yeah, trying to summarize and remember this discussion. James, do you happen to remember where this left off?
No, I think we just discussed it here in the PR.
Okay.
So originally there was an extension ref on listeners. I think when we revamped the listeners concept, that got dropped, and that was how we ended up with this dangling listeners object ref type. I think that's the name. And then someone within VMware who was looking at an implementation kind of pinged me with the network access control use case for gateways. And they were like, oh, I really want to, their proxy has some sort of access control policy, and they really wanted to put it on the gateway, and that kind of seemed reasonable. So that prompted me to think, it probably is reasonable. I mean, gateway is such a fundamental object in the model that it is probably reasonable to want to, I felt it probably was reasonable to want to add some sort of config to it. But I guess as Bo points out, maybe there are other ways to extend it.
Yeah, it's not as elegant. I think there is definitely a case where it's not consistent, and that's fairly confusing. The only thing is that currently where extension ref is being used, it's because you had to do it because it wasn't a one-to-one correspondence with an object. And for example, you couldn't shove it into annotations easily. It's worth thinking about this because technically, like every single object if we add extension ref at the object level, almost every single Kubernetes object could be like, you could argue that they should all have it, which then makes it that one I have that's what brought up that comment.
Yeah, I don't have a strong sense of what to do here. I think that people do want to add their own tweaks to gateway. I think that's probably a likely case. But maybe we could resolve this and say, like document the name maps decorator pattern.
Yeah, like for example, you can see, like, let's say you had two groups and they both were working on independently and they decide to extend gateway. At that point, you would probably end up having a list of extension refs, and then it just becomes like a object reference annotation almost, which maybe
this is a list of extension refs.
Yeah, it's like almost like, okay, should we just have try to formalize either the notion of name mapping or a list of object ref typed annotations? Probably the second one will be harder to, it'll land in like a year. But the first one seems doable in that it's just describing a pattern.
Yeah, let me think about this. Maybe I might come back. Maybe I should just leave this off for now. I mean, it doesn't sound like we have a lot of consensus around it. I'm not hearing a lot of enthusiasm. So maybe if I document, this is how you can extend things, that'll satisfy the implementers.
And so I think that makes sense, and I agree with everything that has been said. I've been thinking about our other resources and how you might extend them, because always comment about, well, we could have an extension ref per resource, got me thinking about just where our current extension points lie. And so for gateway class, it's almost entirely about linking to parameters. So that is kind of the extension point. The far other side of our spectrum, we have backend policy, which again is, I'm pretty sure, no, I guess we don't have an extension ref there. So that's, I guess the idea is you can build a superset of that if you want your own custom resource. Routes are unique in that you can build your own kind of route if you would like. If you don't like a current route, it's very easy to build your own route and bring that. Gateway is kind of unique in that it is kind of our core resource that we don't really have a model for extending, etc., or replacing with an alternative. I think that's fine. And I think the solution, at least short term, is just to document how you would extend it, and it may not need an extension ref per se, but it is good. I appreciate you at least exploring how we would extend gateway, because this does seem like a hole in the current API. Even if the solution is use annotations or name mapping or whatever it happens to be, documenting that I think would be great. Cool. Any last things on that PR? All right, I'll keep on moving. That has me thinking about one of Harry's recent issues, which I think is a decent transition point here. There was a Slack thread that Harry has at least partially documented in this issue, and that is if we want to have any kind of idea of how extension points, like why we need an extension point in a route match, with the idea that we already allow for custom routes, in what case would you want to use a CRD extension for route matching as opposed to just building a custom route that is easier to work with? I don't know, but this did seem like, at least for HTTP route, it seems like an extension point in the matching may not add a lot of value.
Well, can't you make that argument for all the extension points?
Yes, you could. I think there are other extension points that potentially provide more value. But you're right. Yeah, I guess my argument of when would a CRD versus a custom route, like when would an extension CRD be preferred over a custom route? That's fair. It just, for matching logic specifically, it seems like I can understand why you might want to have a custom extension for either say filters. Yeah, definitely want custom extension point there. For protocols where you may not have a clear concept of how you would match, okay, sure, I can understand why we might have an extension point there. But for HTTP route, it seems like we already have a fairly solid understanding of how you might match a request, and adding an extension point may not be necessary. And this goes back to my original bias to be hesitant about the fields we're adding as part of, like, we already have a pretty large API surface. And I know this is alpha. I know we can break things. I know we can remove things, but it will still be harder to remove something like if someone is already using X feature. And if we don't have a very clear answer to how a specific extension point might be used, I don't know. I'm not as sure there's value there. At least this is my recollection of that Slack thread and my own personal bias.
So in HTTP route, we have a extension ref in the route spec, and we have an extension ref in the route match, and we have an extension ref in the route filter. So there's three places we have it.
Yeah. And it almost feels like the only place we really need it is the route filter, but I could be very wrong here.
But can you make this? Could you make the same argument to use other extension techniques here, even for filter?
trying to remember what filter looks like. We already have custom filter. What's the
Does it
difference
match
between
a list? Like any embedded objects, it feels harder because you can't. There's no way to like name them unless you have explicit names and match them up.
Right, but for filter, we already support custom filters, and is that not through? I have to double check this. So we've got spec, and we've got an extension ref here. This certainly could follow the same guidance and the same idea that Bowie's already communicated for the potential extension ref on Gateway. So I think there's limited rationale for having this here. Then we go into HP route match, eventually. And we get this extension ref. And this is in the same context, we're matching path headers, and then who knows what else we might want to match. I kind of get this, but I honestly have no clue what this custom, my route matcher would look like. And then we go a step further and get into filters. And I think you do need extension ref in filters, because that is how you, as I understand it, that is how you would add any kind of custom filter.
Okay, because the thing you can do with an extension ref on filters that you can't otherwise do is you can attach it to a specific rule rather than to a specific route.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's also true for for the embedded match extension ref, but I'm struggling to see the use case for that custom matching. It may exist, I don't know.
Regex matching.
Right.
Well, which one we don't have?
Well, no, but I think that would fall under implementation specific, right? Path match type. Yeah. That's header. Oh, we actually do have regular expression here. But yes, there is a theoretical reason to have extension ref on the route match. I can't think of any compelling reason to have extension ref in spec here if we're not going to also have extension ref in Gateway. And I think I would lean toward not having them in either place, and instead deferring to a name mapping and or one-to-one, and or annotation model. Yeah. Okay, well, I know we're over time here. That is an existing issue that could use some more conversation. I'll try to summarize our conversation today here, but if anyone has additional feedback, I'm sure it'd be great to add to this thread. Yeah, okay. Well, I think that's all for today. Was there anything else that we should have covered that we didn't have time for?
RC1.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping me on the agenda. Yes. RC1, I think it's very reasonable to throw out a RC, especially now that API cleanup is in. I'd love to get that out tomorrow. Maybe we can rely on some, Are there any other PRs or any other things that we would like to get in before we throw out an RC? Of the pull requests that exist, I, of course, am biased. I would love to get a couple more of these in the request workflow. This one feels like it can, I mean, this is a docs PR, so maybe that's not quite as important for RC, but still, I think that's super close.
I really need to make the conditions changes for HTTP route that we discussed in the doc a couple of weeks ago. I just haven't had bandwidth to be able to get that done.
Okay. Do you think we should wait for an RC before we should wait for those updates before releasing an RC?
I'll get it done by Monday.
Okay. Okay. That sounds reasonable. And okay, yeah, let's plan on that then. I don't think there's a huge difference between a Friday and Monday RC, and it would be good to have those conditions in. Does that work for you, Bowie?
Yes, although those are famous last words. Getting it done by Monday.
That's true. All right. Well, sounds good. Thanks everyone for the great input here, and we'll talk to y'all next week.
Thanks.